We appreciate everyone that's still here. This is the last panel, I believe. And so where should we kick it off? We were just talking about the public markets. BitGo is a new entrant to the public markets this year. How are things? How are you feeling about Bitcoin, the cycle? You've seen this before. A lot of people haven't. What's the lay of the land?
Well, let's see. This is a Bitcoin-related topic tonight. So I'll only mention IPO, I guess, a little bit. I think the last crew mentioned it. You know, obviously we have traditional markets with direct access to Bitcoin by way of BlackRock and a dozen other ETFs. We got it through the DATs, et cetera. I think right now, of course, the public markets are kind of cool on crypto. I think there's number one factor is it really is AI. It's just so damn sexy that is just unstoppable for now. But then secondarily, I think people are a little bit worried about Bitcoin. I think actually quantum is a topic. I kind of hate to say it. I'm not afraid of quantum. I don't think it's a significant threat. But when we did the roadshow for the IPO, I spoke to a lot of investors, traditional investors. They don't usually talk to crypto companies. They can barely spell BTC. They're trying to figure out what we do. And it was a top 3 question. What's going on with quantum computing? Okay, I was actually really surprised because I mean we talk about it a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal. So I think we have actually, as an industry, we should pull together like ASAP and get a quantum-resistant algo in the protocol. And then, of course, there's going to be other things to figure out with Satoshi's coins and wallets upgrading, et cetera. But as soon as that thing is in, it's just going to take this massive thing off the table. And you know, obviously, there's debate about what's the best version to do it, what's space efficient and all that in terms of quantum. I think we should just put all that aside and just put one in and get going on it. And I think it'll be fine. So obviously, you don't want to mess up the crypto. It does have to be sufficiently reviewed. I don't mean to be cavalier about it. But I think it's really important that we get that done fast.
Yeah, I agree there in the context of, in my opinion, and I'm not a cryptographer or a quantum.
Do you run into this with your investors? They ask this question?
Yeah, and our feedback is that we're paying attention to all of this stuff and all of the development, but I think in our view the perceived left tail risk is actually greater than the realized left tail.
I totally agree.
And so, nevertheless, even if it's like even if the realized left tail or the realized probability of this event or this black swan that everybody's scared about and posting on X or the bears are running with, even if it's like not even physical reality, but it's just a narrative, Bitcoin would benefit from chopping that left tail off and removing it, right? It's like there's a long-standing notion that the U.S. government would ban Bitcoin, and then I think partly the night of the election, Bitcoin mooned because it was like this perceived left tail was chopped off, right? And so I think with quantum, that's kind of how we think about it, is like, there's people now looking about it, talking about it. I think it's good that the Bitcoin community is, at least starting to talk about mobilizing. I wouldn't say they're mobilizing quite yet, but I think it's a good, it's a good topic to stress test.
Yeah, I think we've been in this industry a long time, and there's always the current FUD, and this is it. And whether it's real or not doesn't matter. If we can just keep knocking them down, we'll keep winning over the long term. So yeah. It's good. All right. Let's see. I guess digital asset treasuries. I mean, I guess you know something about those.
Yeah. I agree with you. The public markets are very cool right now.
Now, by the way, your investor base, what % is retail?
In numbers, 99%, but in share count, I would probably say 50%, 60%.
But that's still really high, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the previous crew was talking a little bit about needing institutional investors to kind of lead for retail. So back to the IPO process. Look, I think Bitcoin could demonstrate across multiple products like yours, products like the ETFs, maybe companies like ours, that actually, that whole old school way of doing it through the institutions may not be the best way to take a company public. So if you look at companies going public, I mean, the first 6 months is a lockup period. They should call it the hedge fund play period. and every company goes through it, and then like you can look at like even Coinbase, this super strong company, hasn't re-hit its IPO opening price. So I know the institutional guys like to sell their book and the pricing mechanisms that they use, but I wonder if it's really serving us today. And then on the retail side, I'll tell you, so we allocated 25% to retail. I kind of wish I'd been brave enough to give 100% to retail. Somebody's got to run that experiment. The bankers will tell you it won't work. They don't really know. They'll tell you it doesn't work because that's in their vested interest, but they don't really know. But what you do get from the retail teams that we had, Fidelity, SoFi, Webull, Mumu, I don't know, we had about five different retail venues that contributed. They give you these daily stats of exactly what the retail interest in your product is. And it was, 4 or 5x oversubscribed on the total amount just by retail. Didn't need any institutional. Could have fully filled the IPO. And that's money that gets committed up front. And then the hedge funds, look, I know they got big accounts at the banks and stuff, and of course the long guys are credit worthy. But retail puts the money up. So anyway, they give you daily stats. It's way better than what the bankers do, and very interesting.
Turning the corner on this bear market, do you think the bottom is going to be driven by the retail crazy hodler maxi crowd, or is it going to be the institutional big money saying, all right, time to dip my toe in here, under the 200 week, it's, let's allocate?
I don't know. I don't know if it's too smart or not smart enough to predict price. It could go any which way. It could go down for a while. Those of us who have been in the industry, like we were usually kind of hardened to this part. I think it's more frustrating for the business because you're trying to move the business forward, and we kind of got to wait until kind of the industry catches up a little bit. But I don't know if we're at the bottom yet. It could go lower, and if it does, it's fine. The thesis of Bitcoin is still completely intact. So we're in New York here. Raise your hand if you voted for Mamdani. What? You guys elected him? All right, so look, the governments are going to do what the governments are going to do, and they're going to continue to prove our thesis every single day of the week, and that'll shine through in the end. I think when people are thinking about where the price is today or tomorrow or whatever, you kind of lose, like, why are we really doing this? And then, the governments of the world need a way to settle transactions between them. And people are learning that, hey, if we have dollars, the U.S. could decide they don't like you because of whatever whimsical reason, and then they'll just take your money. That's a difficult place to be for most countries. Like if you're Saudi Arabia right now, you got to be thinking like, geez, do we want to be holding a bunch of these dollars? So look, I'm not trying to predict that's going to change anytime soon. It's a complicated question, but over the long arc of time, you cannot have a currency that people take away from you and yet still have it be the settlement currency. All right, so the thesis is still strong. I don't know where the price is. I don't know. How about you? You think we're at the bottoms yet?
Yeah, tough question, but it looks like, the interesting data, we went over this a bit earlier, but in terms of like the amount of the network and the amount of coins and UTXOs and whatever that are like at losses or or capitulating, at a loss right now, it's actually greater than what we saw in 2022, but a much lesser of a drawdown, right? So maybe it's sort of this like rounded top or a 2-year kind of, bull and a lot of institutional capital. And like, I think it was something like 80% of the actual dollars invested in the network, not like the market cap, was higher, right? So these are the levels you kind of see towards the kind of rounded end of some bear. And then that doesn't mean that it's, moonshot to all-time highs. It probably means 6 months or 12 months of boredom, if you're just looking historically, and we'll see what happens. I think, there's a macro-driven effect here of like, is it rate hikes, rate cuts? That's all tea leaves, and that's probably even the only thing harder than Bitcoin to predict is what the Fed's going to do next. So it's a multifaceted question, but I think 60K, if you're waking up today with 0 Bitcoin allocation, it's a damn good time to start an allocation.
Yeah. Let's see. What do you think? You think corporations are going to pick up Bitcoin more or less now, given kind of what's going on with the Bitcoin market?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's probably the next
And by
phase.
the way, do you get non-DATs asking you for advice about whether they should put Bitcoin on the balance sheet?
Yes, less so over the last 6 months. And so there was a ton of inbound, passive inbound in Japan after we kind of started our business and into the bull market. An interesting tidbit, and this is like a not so much an American culture thing. About 7 or 8 of the companies that have been following Metaplanet and the treasury strategy in Japan have come out, apologized, and have pivoted. Right? And so it's like 50 vol asset, these things happen, but there's not so much of an appetite for that in the public markets, it seems.
Well, I know exactly what's going on. So we're public now, right? You can look at our financials, and we've got our revenue, and then you've got where your income comes in, right? And of course on the income, if Bitcoin takes a big loss, and so we maintain, I don't know, 2,500-ish, maybe a little more Bitcoins on the balance sheet. Now, we're not a DAT, right? We're an operating company, and it's what we think works well for our managing of our treasury assets. But yeah, then there's some people, and when you're a public company, like there's some people that are your fans, some people want to take shots, and so then you got to show a negative number just because Bitcoin didn't do so well, and they'll pick that one out. So if you're a public company CFO, it takes some hard skin to tolerate that, because you just don't want that. You could have a stellar performance, and if you have a substantial amount of Bitcoin there, then you're still going to have like this big negative number. This, you just wish people didn't have to see, and people misinterpret it. As much as the SEC tries to make all of this easy for retail investors, probably the level of sophistication around financial statements is pretty low.
Yeah, we saw the same thing with our last 2 earnings releases. It's just hugely negative net income with growing operating revenue and growing revenue, but that's overlooked, right? And so
you can make any narrative you want.
Yeah, and so it is what it is on that front. But on on the Bitcoin market, you guys, BitGo is multi-jurisdictional. What market jurisdiction or what segment are you really excited about? Do you think the next kind of phase of growth is? Obviously, the U.S. is the 10,000-ton gorilla, but are you guys looking to Asia, the Middle East, LATAM? How do you think on the next phase of the market?
Look, we operate globally, right? So we've got 7 custodial entities around the planet, and we use that as the backbone of what we call the Go network, so you can settle kind of globally. On the Bitcoin side, I think the sentiment is pretty similar across the globe right now. So I'm not sure there's been a hot zone or a cold zone. And then there's been a lot of focus on other types of products around, like stable coins, of course, people are talking about. There's been more announcements about agentic payments than there actually have been agentic payments. And then tokenized equities is what people are talking about. On the Bitcoin side, I think globally it's probably relatively flat right now.
What about the tokenized equity front and just kind of are you a believer in the 24/7, 365 nature of all financial markets? Is this kind of a crypto native pipe dream, or is this kind of where everything goes eventually?
No, that's happening. And guess what? Bitcoin deserves credit for it. Like, we created it. Like, Bitcoin made 24/7 markets. That is being followed across all markets. So that'll happen. The big entities are all doing that. On the tokenized equities front, I guess I met with Paul Atkins this week. Super happy to have him there trying to make capital markets better, more IPOs, and he's very open to experimentation of how companies grow, how you might offer tokenized types of products, and he's not afraid of it. So I think that's the biggest thing that we need is regulators are just open to it. Not everything's going to work. That's fine. And shut it down if it's not working. But let these things take root and be tried. So they're very open, and that's why here in the U.S., I think there's at least a dozen different tokenized equity kind of models and approaches. So we're trying to support all of those. Though that's obviously indirect to Bitcoin. But I do think Bitcoin still deserves credit for all of this stuff. It was the father of it all.
Does BitGo on the lending front? What are your thoughts on the Bitcoin collateralized lending? What are your thoughts on this market has kind of gone from very, very early stage to now becoming more institutional, and the cost of capital from everything I can see seems to be slowly but surely drifting closer to SOFR, but still we got a long way to go relative to what you can get at regular asset-backed securities lending. So just thoughts on the lending market. Is this obviously in every bear market there's a lot of leverage that gets wiped out. In a bull market, everybody's a genius with leverage, and Bitcoin's a volatile asset, so that comes in phases. But on a long time frame, do you view Bitcoin as like this, digital capital collateral that's great for, that's plugged in everywhere in the financial system, or it's just no leverage, spot hodl? Like, how do you think of it? What's your philosophy?
Well, the markets are growing. The Bitcoin market is just so much smaller. I'm sorry, I've been talking way too much today. The water. Okay. Let's see. The Bitcoin markets are just so much smaller. So securities lending and securities-based collateral systems are just so much out there. They're going to remain bigger for a while. But this is going to grow. And look, you need the markets to be connected and to get larger in order for the liquidity to flow. Bitcoin has the advantage; it does run 24/7. It also has the advantage that it's pretty much instantly liquid, kind of anywhere that you need it in large quantity. So, thank you very much. So I think this is going to grow. It's got to grow kind of slowly. Once the markets get to a particular stage where you have crossover between Bitcoin markets and other markets, then I think we're going to see more interesting things, and you'll start seeing people taking counterparty risk on the lending. I think the crypto market since 2022 has been, I think, pretty healthy and good about not getting overextended on under-collateralized lending, counterparty credit risk. But that will return as the markets get bigger and the liquidity gets bigger.
What else? We had some notes earlier. What else did we miss? There's a.
So you asked the question of where in the world. So you guys are in Japan. You got a front row seat there. What's it like in Japan, sentiment-wise, for your product for Bitcoin? Is it also kind of cooling with the rest of the world, or is it different?
Yeah, I mean it's been a tough 12 months or whatever the stretch has been since the.
You said stretch.
Yeah, stretch. Yeah, the talk of the town. I mean, look, I think we were number 2 to kind of pioneer the treasury strategy and adopt it as a core asset. Companies 4 through 60 for the DAT trade happened within months after Saylor kind of spent 4 years, and we were kind of alone with him for a year or so in the public markets, doing raising capital to acquire Bitcoin. I think it happened so fast. There was so much with companies 3 through 100. I think a lot of those companies too they're not really fundamental believers of Bitcoin, right? It's just opportunistic. The capital markets are open. It's time for a Dylan coin treasury company, right? It's like so there was a lot of froth there. I think that's been washed out. Obviously the performance has been tough for Bitcoin. It's been tough for any public equity with exposure to Bitcoin, whether that's an operating business or just the physical asset itself. But yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental thesis, the same, the reason that people have been allocating to Bitcoin in the public markets for the past really 6 years, or Bitcoin exposure rather, is unchanged, and the retail base is definitely hardening in terms of the conviction, right? There's a lot of hot money that's come in, that's come out, but the actual investor base understands, or it's like, well, why is the stock down? Well, Bitcoin is down, right? So there's things we can control and execute on, and there's things we can't control. But long term, our conviction and our thesis hasn't changed.
Yeah, look, I think we see the same thing in the public markets in terms of interest in BitGo. The companies the firms, the investment firms that are most excited and talking to us about what we're doing tend to be crypto folks. The crypto folks have already figured out what crypto is, why it matters, how it's going to change things, what Bitcoin role in that. The traditional firms right now are very much kind of sheeping away. But we've seen this pattern, I don't know, 4 or 5 times now, right? So, look, I think this time we're going to see more sticking to it from the traditional firms for the tokenized equity side. I think there's just enough in there that it's going to make it through at least a bit. Some firms will drop out probably, but we've seen hey, we're going to be in Bitcoin, and then oops, they have a bear market, and then they decide it's not worth it for them. But the other thing that helps, of course, is the regulatory front, where now all of a sudden you don't have the worry of like the government's going to come after you, and then that also percolates globally. So we have an entity in South Korea, which we hope will come live actually very, very soon. It's been 2 years in the making. I remember meeting with politicians about a year and a half ago in South Korea, and at the time it was before Trump, right? And so America was super negative, and they're like, look, we're probably not going to pioneer safe regulation for digital assets like ever. But if America ever changes, then maybe we'll follow. So that's happening right now, and that's been happening across the planet. So I think that will continue to help, and it does allow like everybody to come in a way that's going to lead to good growth for all of us.
Yeah, it's a good way to wrap it up. I appreciate everyone's time here, and thanks Mike for being here.
And thank you, Dylan. Thanks, everybody.